Shalom, everybody. We are going to just wait. We're just going to wait a moment as people are signing on. I'm so excited to see your faces. I miss you all. And we're just going to wait another moment or two. Shalom, everybody. Welcome. Hi, how are you? I love seeing all of your faces. It's been a while since I've seen some of you, so hi. Thank you all for joining us here tonight to discuss sensory processing. For those of you who don't already know me, my name is Ali Wiener Avraham. I am the Jewish Education and Early Childhood Education Coordinator at the JCC of the Lehigh Valley in Allentown, Pennsylvania. I myself am a parent of 2 young children and wear plenty of hats in our community as a teacher, educator, and support for our teachers and parents within our community. Tonight's topic is near and dear to my heart. I have a child that was recently diagnosed with sensory processing disorder and have also come to learn about my own sensory processing struggles. As an educator, I have seen time and time again with many children the struggles in the classroom, at home, when it comes to clothing, when it comes to toys, when it comes to sounds, and all sorts of interesting behaviors that ultimately could be related to sensory processing. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce you to tonight's speaker, Dr. Jennifer Miller.
All right, well, welcome. I'm going to go ahead and move over to the outline. So I'm with a little bit of a background about me. Then we're going to move into what is sensory processing. We're going to talk about the different systems of the sensory systems. We are going to talk about what is sensory processing dysfunction. When can you actually say that it's maladaptive responses and it's really impacting your day? And then we're going to talk about some resources at the very end and have Q&A. We will have Q&A as we go along, but I'm making sure that I'm hitting on the main points of sensory processing before we move into the larger quantity of Q&A portion of the presentation. Okay, I'm not going to go over all this, but this will be on your website. So I just gave a little bit of my background. I've been an OT for 20 years. I started out at 11 wanting to begin OT. I had my own sensory processing issues that my mom could tell you about with being oversensitive to how shoes feel, clothing feels. And when I got into OT school at Temple, I really found a lot more about sensory processing. I got my bachelor's degree in OT at Temple, and then I got my master's degree at Temple, advanced master's in OT, and then I got my doctorate at Temple University as well. So I'm a big cherry and white fan. So just moving on, I'm specialized in a few things. I'm not going to go over all of them, but I am internationally certified in sensory integration. I have my certificate in early intervention and in pediatrics. I also have my certificate in teaching in higher education. I'm a professor as well as a clinician. I do advocacy. I work in the school-based OT. I work in early intervention 0 to 3 and the 3 to 5 program. I do not work under the intermediate unit, however. I do work with cases that are in due process frequently. Like I said, I do private clinical therapy, and I also do adults with sensory processing disorders. So I treat individuals from birth through aging with sensory processing disorders. Alrighty, so we will move on from there. Okay, so sensory processing, what is it? A lot of people call it, oh my gosh, this kid has sensory. And I'm like, well, everybody has sensory. So you will find out that just saying a child has sensory is a bit of a pet peeve to me, because that's not what it's actually called. If it's something that is bothering the child and it's something that's maladaptive, that's called sensory processing disorder. Okay, so what is sensory processing? So it's the process of taking in information in your environment around you, and then that information goes into your central nervous system. You receive that information, you take it in, and then you decide, am I just going to integrate it into my body, or is this something that I need to respond to? Okay, so in short, we call it taking it in, sorting it out, and then connecting the information from the environment and deciding how to respond to it. It's a continual process from the time you wake up in the morning till you go to bed, and even while you're sleeping, your body is constantly processing the sensory information around you. The goal with sensory processing is that you are functional during your day, taking in this information and then responding in an adaptive way. So learning and adaptation of your motor system, your behaviors, and your emotional responses, right? A lot of people get a little mixed up between what is the behavior a result of sensory processing challenges, or is sensory processing, or is the behavior then causing sensory processing challenges? So we're going to go over all those things. Okay. Now, most people know the sensory system as hearing, so your auditory system, your seeing system, so your visual system, your smelling system, which is your olfactory, your taste system, which is your gustatory. However, there are two other systems that are really super important. One is your vestibular system, and that's your movement system. Okay, so that's when your body is moving up and down, side to side. Where are you in space? The other system that's really important is your somatosensory system. That's actually broken down to two: your tactile system, which is your touch system, and your proprioceptive system, which is the information that goes into all your joints in your body. And that information tells you not where you are in space with your vestibular system, but it gives you input to say, I'm standing, I'm leaning, I'm about to fall over. That's information that's firing into all your little proprioceptors that are in all your joints, along with that tactile and how you're feeling. That's called your somatosensory system. This is where I see most of my clients having challenges. So we're going to talk about that and what can be a little bit confusing with that area. So in that little the visual that I gave you, when it talks about the body position, that and the balance system, those are your vestibular and your proprioceptive systems. Your tactile system is how you're touching, which we're going to go into a lot more detail as we find out about sensory dysfunction. Okay, so the somatosensory system. So I have a couple examples here of using Play-Doh. People always say, oh, my child has defensiveness to touching things. Well, people can get a little mixed up with being over responsive to touch input, but sometimes it's actually your proprioceptive system. So either it's getting not fired enough or it's over firing with the information. So this somatosensory system uses both of those systems together, and that helps you know where you are in space. It helps you feel yourself sitting on a chair. It helps you hold a pencil. It helps you be able to use a spoon to feed yourself. It helps you get dressed. It tells you all those things. So if you see a child who looks clumsy or seems like that they look a little bit sluggish, these typically fall into the somatosensory part. Okay, now this vestibular system, this is the system that is inside your inner ear. So people get a little mixed up between the auditory system and the vestibular system. Your vestibular system is inside the inner ear and actually has these semicircular canals, which tells you if you're spinning. So people who get a little sick with motion sickness or you're on rides, that's actually your semicircular canals. That's part of your vestibular system. As we get older, we actually get the crystallization inside those canals, and that actually makes one be more intolerant to movement, just because the liquid that goes inside those canals hits the little crystals inside of your canals, and that's what makes you sick. Some people, even without having that as children, and they're younger, they have an issue with that system. The other part of that same system does your linear movement, which is your, you have two systems. You have your saccule, and then you have, two parts of your body inside your inner ear. You have your saccule and have your utricle, and that tells you forward and back and side to side. So I'll have some kiddos who can't tolerate the spinny stuff but can do fine going forward and back and side to side. I have other people where it's the opposite. A lot of us actually regulate ourselves, which we'll talk about later, with our vestibular system with that linear and regular rocking. So you can even find yourself sometimes just like rocking to yourself and you don't even realize it. And that's because we regulate ourselves with rhythm, and that's that inner part of our ear. Kiddos who have a challenge with that system either over need it and they rock a lot. You may see kiddos with different diagnoses that you see rocking a lot. And sometimes kiddos, they are not actually feeling the input, and so they have no rhythm, and that really affects their motor planning. Okay, now, your regular systems that most people know about are your visual systems, your auditory systems, which is the hearing system, the smell, and then your taste. So I'm not really going to go into those in more description. I just wanted to make sure I got over the proprioceptive and the vestibular systems in more detail for you, because we're going to put it all together. All right. So this is the goal for our body, is to be able to take in this information and modulate it. So it's called sensory modulation. That's one part of the sensory system, is sensory modulation. Okay. So we take this information in, we organize it, and then depending on how's that intensity of it coming in, some of us can only handle a little bit of the intensity, right? And then we're like, whoa, I can't handle this. I cover my ears, or I have to cover my eyes, or I flee from it, I run away. Or that you'll see kiddos start having outward behaviors. You can see this with adults as well. Adults will avoid going into different areas and social community type of outings like Target or Walmart, just because it's too much for them to handle in their sensory system. So what we want to do is be able to modulate all this information coming in. Okay, now the goal then is, as this information is coming in, if we have a very modulated, well integrated system, we can adapt to the responses. So this information is coming into my body and I'm like, well, that's a lot of information, but I think I can handle it. I can get through this store, or I can get through this parade, or I can get through whatever this thing is, my kid's screaming. and I can make good decisions still, right? I can grade what's happening. I can habituate to it, which we're going to talk about. And I can, you know, still be functional. So what you want to do is you want to be able to habituate with this information. So let's say you're putting on a shirt in the morning. At first it might feel scratchy, or you'll be like, you went from long sleeves to short sleeves and your body says, it feels kind of weird, but maybe in a couple of minutes you feel better about it. So that's called habituation. Some of our kiddos and some of adults, we don't habituate to this. So it feels like we have bugs on us all day long because the shirt still feels irritating to them from the time they put it on till they take it off. They haven't been able to habituate to this new sensation of touch that's coming into their body, right? So we have to figure out how to be able to habituate to this sensory tactile input coming in with the example of the shirt. The same thing happens with, we're in the car and we hear a certain sound or the movement. Are we habituating to it, or are we still constantly, is it still firing? We're constantly thinking about it. Now think about the kiddos who have a hard time, or the adults have a hard time habituating to this, and it's constantly firing. These kiddos are going to feel really out of sorts. These adults feel really out of sorts when I'm talking to neurotypical adults and they're like, I can't do this or that, and we start figuring it out, and they've lived their whole life trying to figure out why they can't tolerate all this stuff. So it doesn't mean that this is just for kids. And if you're not able to habituate to all this, just think about how bad you're going to feel. It's like if you don't have any sensory issues with this, if you're getting a whole bunch of bug bites or bee stings, that's how the people with this feel all day long. And it doesn't go away. So everybody has different thresholds. Some people have really high thresholds. So you could put, 50 bees on them and they're not going to care, right? Their body is like, ooh, I want more and more and more. You have other people, you just need like one little tiny bit of input and they're like, okay, I can't handle this anymore. So we have different thresholds for everything. So your threshold to that sound information coming in might be pretty high, but your threshold for certain smells might be really low. Okay. So we're going to talk about that as we go through, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of a background of how this is going to affect everyday activities. All right. Now, the idea with sensory processing and then sensory integration therapy is for the ability to self-regulate. So you have two different ways to self-regulate. You have a pre-cortical way, which is a cognitive way to help yourself self-regulate. That's part of your cortex. Okay, that's called an executive functioning skill. So I know that I have to get myself organized. I have to get ready for school. I go to school. I'm sitting there. I'm consciously, cognitively thinking about following the teacher's directions and just taking in the input from around me in a cognitive way. But what we're talking about here, though, is sensory regulation from a subcortical, not thinking about it cognitive way. That's what sensory processing is, taking in that information in a way that you're not thinking about it. All right, because a lot of people say, oh, I think they're doing it on purpose. And I say, let's figure out if it's cognitive or subcortical. Okay. The idea is that you can, and especially as babies, because I'm going to talk about when the doctor says they're going to outgrow it, that's a red flag. If you hear that at 3 months old, you either need to find a new doctor or you need to send them to somebody who understands, because that's a major red flag when they say, or grandma says, or Uncle John says, oh, they'll grow out of it. Johnny was like that. No. Let's not do that. Because when they're 8 and 9 or 12 and 13 and coming to me, it's really challenging to get these bodies integrated. The first 5 years of life is when it's the most important. Okay, so you want to have this balanced sensory system. And now we're talking about that subcortical sensory processing system, not that cognitive executive functioning stuff. That's part of your cortex. So we want to be able to comfort ourselves. Children should be able to figure out, without thinking about it, how to comfort themselves, right? If you're starting to see where they say to you, oh, he's just colicky. Oh, Lord. you either want a new doctor if they say it's just colicky and he's going to outgrow it, or you say, great, he's colicky. That's a red flag. So does my child have sensory processing disorder? Do they have gastrointestinal issues, which could be GERD, which could be reflux? What's going on? You're right, doctor. He is colicky. Let's figure this out, instead of saying, oh, he'll outgrow it. He's just colicky. That doesn't happen. Okay. So they want to be able to self-comfort themselves. There's 5 parts of self-comforting for a child that they should be able to go from crying to feeling okay, to being tired, to come back to feeling okay, right? You want your child to be able to go through these stages and get themselves into this self-regulation without needing a lot of input from the caregiver. If you're giving so much input to regulate your child, you need to see a doctor that doesn't say they're colicky. All right, so when this child is in this nice regulated self-comforting, they have really good sleep-wake cycles, they can learn, right? And we know between 0 and 3, I know I said 0 to 5, but we know between 0 and 3 is when the brain learns the fastest and the most amount of that foundation of how they're going to be as an adult. 0 to 3 is basically where you're setting that foundation. They have the fastest connections between all those synaptic connections. You have your dendrites, everything like coming together there, 0 to 3. After 3, it slows down. Then after 5 is the next step where it really slows down. And after 7, you're basically just staying where you are until you start losing it. And you can only enhance what you already know. So 0 to 3. So when those doctors say, oh, wait till they get to kindergarten, red flag, okay? I'm not going to say it's too late, but it's a lot harder. You want your baby to start to be able to tolerate changes. So we're going to move from one environment to another environment within the house, and then out of the house into the community. Can they get out of water into dry, being comforted with a towel? How are they doing that? How are they starting to learn how to prepare themselves for the diaper change? How are they starting to be able to do all this stuff in a way that's just very natural and flows? When you're not seeing those things and you're seeing a bunch of those, or you're seeing a lot of red flags, that's when you want to get help. Everybody has kind of like a few of them, but when it becomes dysfunctional, that's when you need to seek out the right professional. Okay. So that moves me on to what we're really going to be talking about and getting questions from you guys tonight. So instead of saying your child has sensory, you're going to say, my child is diagnosed with sensory processing dysfunction, or I think my child has sensory processing dysfunction. Because if you say your child has sensory, that's great. You want your child to have sensory input coming in and getting those experiences. If you feel your child is having challenges with it, that's when you say, my child may have sensory processing dysfunction. All right. And this is when you have these maladaptive responses. So in comes information. You're expecting this child to be able to respond in a particular way. If they're not, and it's not going how you think it should be for that age or that situation, then that's considered a maladaptive response. Okay. I didn't go into a lot of detail with the different systems because we're going to talk about it here in this umbrella. When people talk about sensory processing disorder, they say, my child is oversensitive to things. Well, if you look at this little diagram here, there's one section that says sensory modulation disorder. It's 1/3 of that umbrella. So it's actually a small part. Everybody thinks that's what sensory processing is. Well, it's actually a very small part. So when somebody says my child has sensory and they can't tolerate touch, well, that's a really, really tiny part. So when you look under sensory modulation, which is that piece I was talking about with the input coming in and how you're responding, you can be over responsive to the input. You could be under responsive, and you could be seeking. All right. So that's where you have that, what people think about as sensory processing. That's when you disorder. That's where you're taking in sight, smell, sounds, and then you're either over responding to what you think the child should be or the adult. They're under responding, so they're not really feeling it at all. So they tend to make choices that could hurt themselves, maybe unsafe, or they're not responding to you and you have to feel like you need to like light a fire underneath them to get them going. Or you have the kiddo who craves it so much they can't get enough, and they run and run and run and run and run and they still can't get it. Or they are jumping and jumping and still not getting enough, but it's not rhythmic. Rhythmic is different, that's regulation, and for a particular reason. So they're actually giving themselves SI input therapy themselves. But anyway, so I like to give the example of, again, a bug bite. So let's say that you, and this is actually, your grandparents probably did this, and this is really great. Maybe you do it or your parents. So your kid bumps their head or they get a bug bite. What does the caregiver do? They come over and they rub the head where the spot is. And then the child's like, oh, I feel better. And we all think, yeah, right, that's just because I told you it's better. Truly, you are making it better because you just gave them proprioceptive input. That proprioceptive input goes faster to the part of the brain that regulates you than tactile input, which is the touch input. So they hurt here or they're really, really itchy. But now that you just gave them deep pressure, that overrides that touch feel or that pain or that, not really feeling good. And it does truly make them feel better. So that's one of the ways that we actually treat sensory modulation disorders, is by giving them lots of proprioceptive input throughout the day. So when people are doing that, it's actually really good. And it's that is something that's like an old, what do they call that? I forget. What do you call it? Like from the past? Anyway, that's something that you want to keep doing. Maybe not like wetting your fingers and like licking it type of thing. I remember those things, but rubbing the head is really good. So now you have somebody who puts their shirt on and it's still bothering them and it's loose and it's really irritating. Now you send them to school or daycare, or you tell them we're going to the grocery store, and you're wondering why this child is not listening. They're having issues. That's because all they can think about are these bugs that they feel like running all around their body. And to them, it's almost so painful. It almost hurts. And we're like, get over it. Why were you okay with it before? And now you're not okay with it today. Well, that's another reason we can talk about. So we can't assume that just because yesterday this child was okay in a similar shirt doesn't mean that today they're going to be okay. Because when you have sensory modulation disorder, things pile up, and the straw that breaks the camel's back can be different every single day. So I'll say to parents, I don't know, the parents will say to me, I don't know what happened. Yesterday we did the same thing and the child didn't respond like he is today. Like nothing changed. However, maybe they had a different sleep, or maybe the texture of the shirt is slightly different than yesterday's, or maybe yesterday morning, the smells or the sounds that were going on in the house were very different than what was going on today. So today they're more sensitive to their touch and their clothing because the input that they had before it is different. Even when we think it's the same, if we become those detectives, we start to realize, oh, wait, yeah, it is different. Why is it different? Do we need to change the environment? We'll go over all those things, especially with your questions. So that's sensory modulation disorder, and that's what people think. However, what I treat the most and what I find that kiddos have is actually sensory-based motor disorder. So that is dyspraxia. Dyspraxia is motor planning. So I have an idea. Can I initiate it? Can I make my body work together, both sides of my body? And can I then execute it? I see that's a lot. People will say to me, my child has ADHD, or my child can't focus. My child is all over the place. Well, you'd be surprised. You think your child is really good at doing things, and they probably are. However, one of the reasons that they jump from an activity is because they can't initiate. So they look at it, they're like, okay, maybe I can't start it. So then they move on to the next activity. And then they don't quite start that one either. So they move on to the next activity. So they can't focus on it, it seems, but truly they can't initiate. They can't figure out how to start this. Parents will be like, well, once we get it started, they know how to do it. So why can't they just do it? Because they don't have that initiation. They can't figure out how to get their body in a subcortical way, not thinking, way to do it. The more we as adults try to tell them what to do and now it becomes cognitive, the child is going to either run away, they're going to freeze, or they're going to get really upset and fight it and have this animal response. Okay, so that's dyspraxia. So parents will tell me my child is ADHD, or they don't have any attention, or I try to get them to do something and they always go against me, or they have a problem with taking in the information from the environment and they're overacting. Well, let's think about what this is. Perhaps it could be dyspraxia, and it's underdiagnosed, and instead it ends up being other diagnoses, and then it's getting treated in ways that really aren't helping the dyspraxia. Part of that, this system of the motor system, is something called postural disorder. I remember how we were talking about the somatosensory system with the proprioceptors in all of our joints, and then the touch system. Well, that's your postural disorder. That's these issues of the information isn't firing into these proprioceptive receptors in all of your joints. So you'll see kids who like fall over, or they're very messy, or they go to touch their drink and the drink falls, and you're like, oh my gosh, they're so clumsy. If you start thinking your child is clumsy, or they're not paying attention because of their ADHD, they may have postural disorder. And this is all part of sensory processing. So we have to not just think about this modulation piece of the over and under responsiveness. A lot of kids get misdiagnosed when they don't feel their body the way that they should be feeling it. So I'll have kiddos who slump over, or they sit in a posterior pelvic tilt, just kind of like chilling like this. And you have to kind of like get them really excited to get their body to move. What happens is the more we sit, actually, it makes us more tired. Sitting takes a lot of energy. And so those kiddos tend to just never get up, because at that point, their body is tired. They're not getting the information into the proprioceptors. So either they look like they're not listening to you, or they look like they don't want to play, or they get up and move around and try to get the input that they need. So that's postural disorder, and that's underneath that sensory motor disorder. The most challenging disorder to treat is somatosensory. That's the most challenging because it's all your systems. It's the vestibular system, it's your touch system, it's that proprioceptor stuff. It's the ability to make both sides of your body work together, which we call bilateral integration. That's the most challenging. Then we go to this part of the sensory processing system that's called sensory discrimination. The example I like to give is if you put your hand in your pocket and say you have your kids, gum, tissue, a quarter, maybe something else. Can you figure out, if you're going to give change, can you figure out which coin in your pocket to get without looking at it? Okay. So that's your touch discrimination system. If you send your kid to go into the sock drawer and to get a particular sock, can they discriminate which sock to get amongst all that busyness in their sock drawer? If you are calling your child's name, can they discriminate between a, oh my gosh, hurry up type of voice, from a scared voice to a mad voice? Can they discriminate between those different sounds? Movements, can they discriminate between fast and slow? Or are they all one speed? Can they actually start to break it down and say, okay, I want to get to this target, but in the middle of this target are obstacles, toys, shoes, whatever. Can they kind of grade that information to get from one end of the house to the other end of the house? Or is it all one speed? Can they discriminate between that movement? So that's an example of sensory discrimination disorder. Alrighty. Okay, we're not going to go over all this because, if you want to have a neuro session, totally fine. I teach this actually. It's a semester long, 3 hours a night. So we're not going to get into that tonight, but I just want to let you know that this is neurological system that's happening. It goes into it's part of your central nervous system, if you've ever heard of that word. So it's really, really involved. So just know that there's a lot more than just getting a lot of input or not enough input in the environment. Okay. going to move on. Okay. So this is where I'm going to talk about particular diagnoses. So if your child is having these vestibular-based problems that I was talking about, that bilateral integration and sequencing. Remember I was talking about the rhythm, and people just naturally like rhythm. Rhythm is really important for reading and writing. Kiddos who have sensory processing disorder could have challenges with writing, handwriting, reading, because reading and handwriting and talking all has rhythm. So kiddos that have vestibular-based disorders, I will evaluate them and see how they're doing with their talking. What is their speech like? What is the flow of how they're talking to me and the back and forth? Do they have pauses? Does it seem, because if I start to talk choppy, to me, it's hard to do. But for my kiddos who have vestibular based challenges with their speech, you'll see it's choppy. Sequencing with writing, that stopping and starting is really tricky. Reading, it affects reading. So if I have a kiddo who says, a parent says they're having a hard time with reading, I will look at their vestibular system. I also look at their visual system, but that's different because I also specialize in vision. But they can also have an intolerance of movement, which is different than gravitational insecurity and depth perception. Gravitational security is different than intolerance to movement, so intolerance to movement means I'm in the car and I'm having a hard time with this movement and how my eyes and the outside is working together. Have you ever been in a car and you're stationary, but the car beside you starts to move and you think you're moving? Well, that's how these kids feel all the time. You know, that horrible feeling, like you're like, or you're like going down the stairs and you miss a stair and you're like, well, that's how these kids feel constantly when they have an intolerance for movement. Can you imagine going through your day and feeling like that all the time? These kiddos are going to have a hard time wanting to be happy and do what you're telling them to do when their body's feeling like this. And then I was talking about the postural ocular. Again, this is stuff I specialize in. We're not going to go into all that stuff. All right. Postural instability, those are those more like clumsy kids, or they're standing and all of a sudden they fall or their ankle gives out. That's all your proprioceptors firing. Okay. So if you see a kiddo and the kid just like naturally falls, you're like, what the heck did they fall over? Is it air? Well, it's that proprioceptive and vestibular system. And that's why they have this postural instability. And I do little tests to figure out, is that what it is? Or is it something else? Is it muscular? Is it a sensory processing challenge? Okay. And then examples that I do with the sensory discrimination, I put things in rice and can they figure out where it is or dig around and get it? So we already talked about that a bit. So I'm just going to skip over that and go to questions soon so you can ask me that stuff. So the goal for your child and for adults is to achieve an integrated sensory system. Okay, so play is the work of children, and my mom can tell you this. Play does not happen anymore. It's worksheets and video games. That is not play. That is not integrating your system. My mom has to hear me say that. My mom is also a preschool teacher. She's a huge fan of play. So she'll have people come to her school and say, oh, well, do they do dittos? My mom's like, no, we play and we learn through play. And they're like, really? But play is the work of children. Through play, children learn about themselves and the world around them. They learn how to adjust. They learn how to modify. They learn how to grade. They learn cause and effect. They learn how to self-regulate without somebody telling them how to self-regulate. When all that they see, hear, and feel makes sense to them, a process of sensory integration occurs. And that is the goal for every human all day long. Every age is to feel integration of the sensory information coming in during the day. How do we do that in children under the age of 5? Play, play, play. Not sitting, not watching. It's play and movement. Okay, now there are some resources here if you guys want to look at these later. Some of the books that I recommend to my clients and to participants in my very long presentations. The Addising Child is great. They have a newer version. They have The Addising Child Grows Up. I tend to work with those older adults and teens. The Good Enough Skin to Sink is a nice book that really just explains it in a very in like a very friendly, family-friendly way. Sensational Kids is great. Lucy Miller, who's one of our founders of OT, and she's an expert in the field. That's her book. Too Loud, Too Bright, Too Fast, Too Tight is more geared towards adults, but it does help them understand where how maybe they are feeling and how maybe they are. Because sometimes my parent might have a system that's seeking or having trouble with discrimination, but the child is the opposite. They're under responsive and they have clumsiness, so poor postural control. So it's like the parent thinks there's something wrong with the kid when truly they both kind of have an issue and maybe only a little bit of each, but it's not matching. Their sensory systems don't match, right? And then as I'm working with the child, the parent goes, oh, wait, am I not supposed to feel like this either? So they start realizing that maybe their child isn't as significantly having as many significant challenges. Maybe it's actually because of how the parent is responding with their sensory system. And they start to realize, oh, maybe it's just not a good match of our systems. So there are some books. So what we'll do now is we will do the Q&A. I had that like pretty intense background, but I just kind of wanted to give you some ideas. And as you're hearing this information, just maybe put some things together, and that might lead to either a change of questions or new questions.
I have a question. First of all, thank you so much. That was definitely eye-opening. Over the last year, I've learned a lot about sensory processing, but I feel like I learned so much more just now about myself and my child. So there was a slide with the umbrella of the different types of sensory processing. Yes, that one. So can you be sensory over responsive, sensory under responsive, and sensory craving at the same time?
You can. What a great question. I get that question a lot. So, fabulous question. I will tell you that everybody has a little bit of this. It's when it becomes dysfunctional, all right? And it also depends on the day. But you can be over responsive to sound with a certain pitch, but you can also be under responsive to sound that might be a different pitch or in a different environment, depending on the vibrations, the echoes, the hertz of the sound that's going on in that environment. Okay. You can also be over responsive to sound and a lot of talking, but be under responsive with your proprioceptive system to actually like ignite your joints to want to get up and do something and kind of look like a lump on a log. So you can have different parts of that. You can be craving with vestibular input, but have sensitivities to sound, and then have under responsiveness with touch. It's very seldom that I've had somebody with only one system being affected in one particular way. I've been doing this for 20 years and I think I've had one child.
Christine just asked the next question I was about to ask. Are there things that we can do for our kids to help them?
Yes, there are. So it's not a one size fits all type of treatment. Depending on what the systems are, I like to develop sensory diets for my clients and educate them on that. So let's say you know that your child is going to be having a very, very busy day tomorrow. Typically, they kind of do okay, but it seems like whenever we go to Target and then we run to grandma's and then we run to wherever, my child really breaks down when they get home. So to prevent the breakdown coming home or after school, because they've held it all together, what can we do to help their system? And it's different. Somebody will be like, oh, well, I saw on the internet that they said to do this and now they're doing it. And now it actually made the child go a completely different way that we don't want them to go. Or they spent all this money on something because it worked for Sally, the neighbor. And it's like, well, it may not. So you have to be careful. It's not a one size fits all type of thing. So proprioceptive input, you can't go wrong with. It affects and helps every disorder that's part of sensory processing disorder. Okay. So deep pressure, deep squeezes. If you have a child who might be under responsive, you're going to want to be a little faster with the deep input to try and arouse them, but also integrate the input that's coming in. A child who is oversensitive or craving input, you want to do it slow and deep. So I like to start the day off with massages with both. So it'll either be like faster to kind of get their body going, or it'll be slower, but both times it's deep. And when I say deep, remember when the kid hit his head or got the really bad bug bite and you rubbed it hard? That's what you want. You don't want it to tickle. If you see your child pulling back from it, you're not doing it hard enough. Okay, that's really, really, really important. You need to get this proprioceptive information in your body every 1 hour to 2 hours throughout the day to regulate children with sensory processing disorders. Okay, doesn't matter which one it is. If you're over, under, craving. You cannot do the same activity every single day or all day long because your body habituates to it. It accommodates and it's no longer effective. All right. So if I do every day at 1 o'clock, I have my child jump for 5 minutes. Eventually, it's no longer going to be effective because they've accommodated to it, so it's not working anymore. Right. So there's lots of things that you can do. So a sensory diet is particular to each child. However, if you don't have a sensory diet, putting in a proprioceptive sensory diet or making sure you're getting these play type of experiences, or even within your ADLs like dressing, reading, whatever you're doing during the day, eating, you can still get that input in the child. So I have the child go get the diaper and come back. Well, now they're getting that input into all their joints and coming back to me, and they have a focused activity, and they're also working on their self-help. They come back to me. If they're holding it, okay, you hold it really, really tight until mommy's ready or daddy's ready or grandma's ready. What are they doing? They're giving their hands input to their hands. Plus they're focusing, they're looking at you, they're making sure that you're seeing what they're doing. So it starts working on the focus, it starts working on communication, and you're giving them proprioceptive input to them. So I use diaper changes a lot. You have them go up the little stairs to wash their hands for self-help after the diaper change, or after eating, super important. Have them rub your hands, get them really, really nice and clean. What are they doing? They're getting really good proprioceptive input to their hands. When I talk about habituation, that's not what I'm talking about. Those are like regular activities throughout the day to do. I'm talking about very planned play activities. You have to be careful that you're not doing that every day for 30 days. Okay. So if this kid is just jumping on something, or your body just gets bored of it. But anytime you can give them very focused jobs and activities, that's the best time to get the sensory diet input into the body. A lot of people think that they have to create special times during the day to do this input, to roll in a blanket or jump on the trampoline or curl under the table. You really don't have to do that as much as you think. You can actually get it in through their natural play and through their natural self-help activities. Not only are you giving them the help, or you're giving them that input in a natural way, which really also helps the cognitive part of the brain as well, but you're creating these routines and hitting the sensory system for regulation.
That was really helpful. Thank you. I have a follow-up question to that, and then there are a bunch of questions coming in through the chat and through
Okay.
Facebook that I will read to you. With that proprioceptive massage-like motions, what do you do if you have a kid that doesn't like touch, doesn't
Right.
like to be touched?
Right. So if the child doesn't like to be touched, that's a great question. What kind of touch are you talking about? Is it light touch? Is it deep touch? You know, you have to kind of figure out if they don't like to be hugged, why don't they like to be hugged? There could be a lot of things going on. So what I will do for some of those kids is people like, oh, somebody actually said this the other day to me, can I put a weighted vest on my child because they don't like touch? Okay, hold on. That's like giving your child medicine. You just don't slap on a weighted vest. One, it's a very particular type of treatment. It cannot be on the person more than 20 minutes. It has to be a particular body weight. You have to start at 10% of the body weight. You can't go over 20% of the body weight. And it's only proactive. You do it before the focus or the issue. All right. So that's a type of touch, but it's deep pressure. And that's more for being a proactive approach. It's not a, oh my gosh, the child's crazy, let's slap on this, weighted vest. And I see people doing this in some of the schools and daycares that I work at. And I'm like, and the poor child's like fighting this vest and like, oh my God, what's going on? The teacher's like, but they told me to do this. And I'm like, okay, let's bring it down. So that's very, very particular. However, purpose of the input with like a heavy sweatshirt or a tight Under Armour shirt is proprioceptive deep pressure. When those kiddos put on that extra small shirt and it's tight on them, I will then give them the deep pressure, because when they have that compression shirt on, or it's on all like the whole part of their arm, they don't have those bugs itching on them anymore. And then I can give them the deep pressure. If the child's not liking the deep pressure, you're probably not doing it deep enough, or you're not getting enough surface area at one time.
That's very interesting, because I was going to ask what the difference is between weighted vest or weighted blankets versus compression shirts and compression blankets.
So a compression shirt, like I was just talking about, you can wear it all day long. It's totally fine. Weighted things you cannot wear all day long or have on your body all day long. Okay. Now, when they go to bed or they're taking a nap, you can have a weighted blanket on, but the percentage of the weight is less. So it's between 5 and 10% of the body, and it has to be spread out on the body, and you can sleep with that. During the day, you can have a lap buddy on your lap. You can have a blanket, on your lap for like 20 minutes, an hour. That's fine. A weighted vest is very different. It's at the torso. You have to be very careful how long you put that on. And again, it's proactive.
Thank you. All right, I have some more questions for you. I've got a parent says, my kid deep squeezes me all the time. Is that a signal he wants me to do that for him?
Yes.
He also pushes his fingertips into my fingernails. Can I give him a toy or something instead?
So that's a really good one. So I teach my kids to do the itsy bitsy spider for their fingers and push it together. We do the finger exercises. We push on the wall. You can give them a toy, but they're not going to get the same compression that you do on skin and body. So you want to find something that's similar. When they're pushing into you, you're probably giving resistance as well. And it's hard to get that with a lot of different kinds of toys. You can do that with Play-Doh or like the model clay type of stuff. You can kind of get that resistance, but a plastic toy, a push button toy, pushing things isn't going to give you the same feedback. When they're doing that, they're seeking proprioceptive input. So fabulous question. Very good awareness that this child is actually trying to get the input, and they're communicating that to you by giving it to you because they like it. So they actually want you to do it to them, but at the same time, they're actually getting it as they're giving it to you. I will usually, for those kiddos, especially if it's at the head, I will give them a weighted hat, or I'll put a hat on them that's knit, or I'll give them 2-hand pressure to the head. And that's very regulating for kiddos who tend to do it near faces.
That's really interesting. Thank you. The next question is, does this happen more in preemies or people with neurological disorders than others that might not have any other underlying issues?
Yeah, great question. So neurotypical individuals with no other diagnosis, it's 20% of the population. So 1 in 5 has sensory processing disorder with no other diagnosis. So you're sitting in a classroom of 25 people. How many people is 20% that are sitting in that classroom with sensory processing disorder, most of the time undiagnosed? When they have a child has a developmental delay, 60% of individuals with a developmental delay also have sensory processing disorder. Individuals with neurological differences like autism or other neurological disorders, 99.9% of individuals with this diagnosis have sensory processing disorder, according to the research.
Wow, that's amazing numbers to hear. To think of all of our kids sitting in a classroom, how many of them are struggling in one way or another. And and it could be something as simple as just sensory processing. I'm reading some of the comments here in our chat, and Stacy suggested another thing that has been very helpful is the redirecting and making sure that there is structure and choices.
Perfect. Yeah. So having structure, expectations is super, super helpful. We know in general with individuals who don't have sensory processing disorder, routine and expectations is really important for anybody, especially for children. As adults, think about how we like our structure. When we don't have structure and something changes, we're really off. So if the type of toothpaste they're expecting is not in that container that day, they're going to be off just like we would be off. Excuse me, but they can't really understand it like we can because we have more cognitive experiences to be able to kind of like be flexible with that, and our prefrontal cortex also helps with that flexibility. So yeah, really great comment there. So routine is huge, huge, huge. Also giving choices is nice. I do like that comment. So if you have, so you have to, like, that could be cognitive and it can be subcortical. So I'll say things like, would you like this or this? If the child says no, then that's okay, because maybe that's not what their system needs right now. But when a child, and my clients will know this, that giving choices and transitions is super huge for transitions. It does help the sensory system, but I'm working cognitively for that, which is that executive functioning, which then helps the sensory system in an indirect way.
Awesome. I have another question. How do you determine that the function of a behavior is sensory related versus something else, such as attention seeking or avoidance?
Okay, great question. So if it is sensory related, you have to kind of follow the history of the child and get to know the child and see what it is. We always like to just go to Johnny's being bad, or Johnny makes bad choices, or why does Johnny always have to do this type of thing. It's got to be behavioral. Let's give it ABA, or let's give it, let's go get a TSS to work on the behavior as a afterward thing. A lot of times though, it's kind of like, well, if you work on what is causing this, so you have to be detectives. So I have my clients go through their week, and every time they have, I kind of do a mini FBA, which I am trained in. So I will go through and kind of do a mini one and see what is the behavior, what do I feel was the cause, what was the antecedent, and then why is this behavior happening? Is it maintaining something? What's he getting from, or this child getting from this behavior? If you're not finding out what that is, or why they're doing it seems to be a sensory thing, like they're looking for input, it's not a behavioral that is caused by attention seeking type of input, right? So you have to be a little detective and kind of do a mini FBA, which is a functional behavioral analysis, but you don't need to know what that is. Just be kind of like, I always tell my clients, take it for a whole week. You're going to watch these behaviors and write down what happens before. Because most of the time my parents say nothing happened. There was nothing that caused this. And I get that. But let's really look and be that detective and kind of see, are there certain things? Oh my gosh, every time Sally pulls his hair, or every time dad leaves for work and shuts the door, or only every other time this thing happens. And remember, it really depends, the straw that breaks the camel's back. So maybe one time it doesn't affect the child, but another time it does. That's usually sensory related and not behavioral also. So I will be that detective. What can happen as the child gets older, 5, 6, 7, and 8, the behavior is typically as a result of not having their system addressed early on. So now they've made these cognitive choices to have avoidance, to now their brain is kind of trained to respond in a certain way cognitively because it wasn't addressed. So we kind of have to like undo that if it's sensory related that's causing the behaviors. Working at kids piece, I have kiddos who have behavioral challenges, and they're they have all these ODD and all these different diagnoses. And when I start working on their sensory systems, I get the history of their sensory systems and how they were feeling, and their behaviors they have now are related to the fact that their sensory system was never addressed, and this is what happened.
Wow, that is so interesting. I have some more questions for you. Do you see this now more than before because of kids or adults being home more and less structure, especially for the kids that aren't in school?
Yes. So I do work virtually, and I also do work face to face in the environments with the family. So that's a great question. I would say, and my mom would probably agree with me, that since the 90s, because kids just don't get the input that they need, I see an increase for sure of having sensory processing disorders, because they're not getting the regulation that they need to combat their over responsive, under responsive, or postural challenges that they do have, and they're not getting the problem solving to help themselves with the motor planning, because we either do it for them or answer the question for them. So that is one of the causes. With being at home, it's definitely more challenging for my kiddos who need to be outside and move and run around. That's definitely been a challenge with the COVID-19 pandemic. Yes, I am seeing an increase in my clients calling me and saying, we're seeing these things again. What could we do? Because we can't go out and do what we were doing before. So we'll problem solve together and change that sensory diet or some things within the environment. Honestly, a lot of the time it's more chores. Let's push the chairs in, let's dust, let's play a game of whatever, we'll do more wall push-ups. We'll work more in supine and prone to work on the postural control. So we just be really, really creative. And yes, it is a little more challenging now with COVID.
Thank you. Here's another question. Lots of questions tonight. Thank you, guys. This is amazing. Is there a certain age that sensory processing disorder can appear in a child, or can sensory disorders be detected in any child at any age?
Okay, wait, start in the beginning again.
Is there a certain age that sensory processing disorders can appear in a child? Do you only see it starting at the age of 2, or can you see it already from the time they're an infant?
So you can see it from the time that they're an infant a lot of times, and it just gets the diagnosis of colicky, or he just doesn't sleep well, or he just doesn't take to the bottle or breast, or yeah, there's a lot of infant sensory processing is actually a diagnosis from 0 to 3 that is actually reimbursable by medical people. You can actually get it reimbursed. After 3, unfortunately, they don't recognize sensory processing as a disorder to be reimbursed for. But the lack of regulation in a child between 0 and 3 is actually a reimbursable diagnosis. It's just a lot of pediatricians don't know that. So they just say, wait till they get older, maybe they'll outgrow it.
That's really interesting. So I have a question. And guys, everyone, you can still ask me questions. But is there a lot of support out there for children that have a diagnosis of sensory processing disorder through the school system, through certain therapies? What kind of therapy or treatment or support is there out there for those kids?
I would say, as far as community and non-therapy type of supports, there's not a lot. There's Facebook groups and things like that. And then that is a good support. Unfortunately, for some people, they might hear what somebody did and then it doesn't work for them and they can get frustrated through it though. But there is some good support out there in those ways. Otherwise, 0 to 3 with early intervention is a resource out there for individuals. I know, unfortunately, I have so many kids that go to the doctor and say these things, and the doctor doesn't address it. And now the child is like 2.5, and the doctor finally says, maybe we should refer you to EI, but the parent never even knew that this was an option. So now they only have a couple of months in EI to work on this system. And, it's still helpful, but it's a shame that the pediatricians aren't and the family doctors aren't recognizing it sooner. So I wish there was more support out there. That's a really good point. and to be able to make a resource out there for people to reach out to, and even just like what you're doing, and just say, hey, my child's doing this. Do you think it's something that I should, look into or ask my doctor about? And that would be a really great idea. There's really, for just sensory processing, no. There's, the Autism Society, there's Autism Speaks, there's different groups like that out there that are local, but just for sensory processing, no. So whoever asked that question, or if it was you, let's go ahead and start that.
Sounds good. You and I will work on that together.
And I'll have my friend Stacy help organize that for you, because she's now an expert in this. She's fabulous.
Awesome. I love it. So, okay, here, my child's now been diagnosed. What's the next step? I've got the doctor on board. I've got the teachers on board. What do I do now?
Okay. So you have to decide, is it something that you need extra support from, that you would benefit from a type of therapy? Just be careful if you go to a clinic and say, my child has sensory processing, and all they're doing is having the child sit down at a table and doing fine motor stuff. That's not the OT, or that's not the therapist that you want. A lot of my kiddos that have coordination challenges, postural, they end up going to another type of therapy. They work on the muscles type of stuff, but they're not really working on that sensory system. So you have to find somebody who is actually trained in or understands the sensory processing system. Typically, well, only OTs can be SIP certified, which is what I am. But you can find other people who actually might understand it, who are PTs. You just have to make sure that everything's being addressed. You can do it yourself. You can read about it. You can try and figure out how to do it. For me privately, I'll do a consult, and maybe I only see that kiddo every other week or once a month. And we do a sensory diet, and then we just email each other and kind of modify it as needed. And then I see the kiddo again. I have other kiddos that I see maybe 2 to 3 times a week, only for a month, and they've got it and they keep going. Now, with sensory challenges, it's nothing that's going to just like go away. It's something that you're going to like continue to need to deal with. So I will have kiddos who were working on it in elementary, and then they're in high school and they're doing lots of sports, and they're not really dealing with it too much. They go to college, they're wearing sweatshirts a lot, doesn't really bother them. They get out into like their job and they're like, oh my gosh, my stuff is back. What's happening, right? And so you might not realize that the different activities that you're participating in change, your body changes, your sedentary or your type of movement within the day has changed, your social awareness starts to change as well. So you'll see these fluctuations as the child or the adult goes through their life. So I unfortunately can't really tell you who to go to and what to do, because everybody is so different. Like I have some people who meet with me, we go over it, they kind of have an idea, it's not too significant, it's fine. Other people, we need to do it until we can get the system understood, and we work on therapeutic listening, we work on different auditory type of rhythmic and sequencing type of activities, right? So it really, and that's the thing with sensory processing, is it's so individualized per child or per individual.
That actually makes a lot of sense. Just as an example, because my son was getting OT and he was getting physical therapy, that both of those only started after he got his diagnosis. And once they got to know him better, they joined together and created one session between both the occupational therapist and the physical therapist to really help him connect his mind and body, all these different things that I never really understood, how struggling to use the bathroom can have an effect because of the way his muscles are weak in certain areas, and it all somehow comes down to sensory processing, which is amazing to understand that.
I was working with a family, and this individual is 10 years old, can't put his socks on. And so I come in and I find out that he's so tight, he can't bend over to reach his feet. So they were thinking the child didn't have the skills to do it. When I started working on some core strengthening and some yoga and some stretching, we realized he can touch it. Then he wasn't doing bilateral integration to be able to reach over. So in one session, this child is now putting his socks on, and for 10 years, he wasn't doing it.
It's so amazing when you figure those things out. That aha moment is life-changing. It really is. I'm speaking from experience also, and not just my own kids, but seeing it with kids that I've had in my classrooms as well. I have a parent asking, can this diagnosis be a reason to have an IEP?
Yes. So it's tricky to just get an IEP with, you can't just have an IEP with OT, because unfortunately you have to have a primary, which would either be challenges with learning and an educational delay, learning delay, or speech therapy. If you are having challenges with sensory processing disorders, you can get a 504. You can have a 504, which is like the pre for the IEP. And if you want an IEP, and these challenges are affecting you, you have to figure out how you can make it into an academic reasoning to have the OT related to it. You can't. PT and OT are secondary; they're not primary. So if you have a speech delay, you automatically have you have a IEP. If you have just OT concerns, you don't automatically get an IEP.
Interesting. That's really good to know. What would you do if you have a child in a classroom that you can see is sensory seeking, throwing themselves on the floor, constantly rolling around, sitting on the teacher's laps, looking for that hug, looking for that proprioceptive feeling, but also at the same time is throwing things across the room, banging into other children, and constantly just, I guess, also unaware of their own space? How, as a teacher, can you help the child
Well,
in
I'm
the
going
classroom?
to ask Mrs. Lash if she doesn't mind explaining. Sorry to put you on the spot. As a teacher, when you see these individuals, what do you do, Mrs. Lash?
Well, for one thing, it helps to have an aide in the classroom who can deal with the rest of the classroom. And then you go to this child and you find something to divert their attention at first, especially if they're wanting to throw things around or hurt other children. It's best to divert their attention. And then you give them something to do, like Play-Doh. And if they've already done that, that's probably not something they want to do. But it's best to divert their attention. And you might have a kid who wants to touch you all over or touch their classmates all over. That's just not appropriate to do in the classroom. You might need to give them a hug, and it might take a while to get them out of that hug. So you want to have somebody else there to help with the rest of the class. If you can't do that, then I have used lap buddies. I have taken them to a quiet corner, give them a lap buddy, and give something that they are most interested in to play with. Now, if you're in the middle of a story or you're trying to explain something to them and something's whizzing past your head, you must stop and address that, because somebody could get hurt. But that, again, you need somebody to help you in the classroom. Or you just stop what you're doing and you might have everybody do something physical. Get up, do an obstacle course at that time, something that child can do and use his whole body or her whole body in. Or I was fortunate that I had some steps in my classroom. And if kids just didn't know what to do with their body, we would work on step climbing, or maybe even have to go outside. You might even have to take everybody outside just to divert that child from hurting himself or others. It's a struggle for a preschool teacher to have a child or four in your classroom with issues. But when I first started teaching, and that was years ago, you had bad children in your classroom, and so you wanted to get them out of your classroom or put them in the corner or whatever. I have learned over the years, children don't come to your classroom wanting to be bad. You just have to take that out of your vocabulary and work with the child where they come to you. As a parent, you get that whole, oh, why are you so bad today? So and so. You got to look into it and find out what's going on. What did you as a parent do to cause that? Like, does he really need to wear that shirt? I have kids who we had to put their shirts on the opposite direction just so they didn't feel that tag in the back in the beginning. And it was very fortunate to me that I had a daughter that took this as a course, and then I went on and learned more about it myself. And I still don't know as much as Jennifer does, but having a little bit of background certainly helped me with my kids. I've had kids ranging from barely could move or barely wanted to move, that wouldn't stop moving, wouldn't stop running around circles. And that's sometimes when you have to go outside and just have everybody run around the playground and just do whatever it takes. You can all go back in and focus again.
So instead of always looking at the child as having a behavioral issue, she's discussing how you can adapt the environment or adapt the entire class or give them something that they can do to get the input, as opposed to looking at them like a bad child. We know under the age of 4, children do not purposely have bad behaviors. Research shows that. We know that psychologically. So it is communication, and they are not intentionally trying to misbehave. We need to look at us. How did we create this behavior as the grown-up and caregiver? And how is this environment not supporting their needs?
I actually learned a great, I guess, really great wording for that. Someone recently brought it to my attention that a misbehavior is exactly what it is. It's a missed behavior. They're missing something, and it's our job as the adult, as the parent, as the educator, the caregiver, to figure out why they are behaving the way they are and what they are missing and how we can help them. And on that note, I want to ask, what with COVID being as it is, there are so many restrictions with bringing sensory toys into the classroom. Sensory, you can't have sand, you can't have water, you can't play with rice anymore. There are all these restrictions now. What are some of your quick go-to things for a child needing some sort of sensory exploration when you can't be touching everything? You know?
Yeah. Those are great questions. So if you have independent bottles, like I make bottles for each kid that has, I'll take a Parmesan cheese container and everybody gets their own little bottle of fuzzy little different kinds of fuzzy things, and it has their name on it. And we play for that for a little bit, put them back in, and then we put those back, right? It's you don't share them. They have their name on it. It's clear. And that's a nice little activity to do. It's inexpensive. You can just have people eat cheese. And then the other thing I like to do is I do a lot of movement with songs and rhythm. We shake, we move, we bear walk, we crawl, we jump, and then I work on that modulation with jumping quietly, jumping loud, walking fast, walking slow, walking medium, walk in a circle, push up against the wall, push the floor down, make the room bigger, push your arms out, make the walls go really, really far. As far as other type of textures, maybe we go out and we have some leaves, or we touch the grass, or we are doing nature walks, things like that. Bring the nature inside and walk with those, and then discard it, because you don't have to worry about passing anything on. You can put on different types of gloves. Everybody has a pair of gloves, and then you are having different gloves to play with things. And then we work on taking the gloves off, and you can wash those. So, there's a lot of things that you can do without having rice and without having pom-pom balls or having witter tables. Like there's a lot of things we can do. We just have to make it a little bit more group oriented and individual at the same time.
Amazing, thank you. I love those ideas. And I know that tomorrow we're going to probably search around for some some empty bottles of Parmesan cheese.
There you go.
I have a comment from a parent in regards to the 504, because there's the communication here on Zoom and the communication
Sure.
on Facebook. A 504 plan is a set of accommodations in schools. An IEP is actually adjusting the education content. So a 504 would be more appropriate for sensory processing disorders because it's more about accommodations to the environment. That is really good to know. And for those on Facebook that asked the question about the IEP, I hope that's helpful. So thank you, Chelsea, because I know that's very helpful for me to know. I want to thank you all for coming. This has been so amazing. I know I have learned a lot. I've taken a lot of notes and I'm excited to move forward from today. I hope that we can start this new sensory processing
There you
community
go. Yeah.
after this. So I just want to let you guys know that our next topic in 2 weeks' time on February 10th is about developmental milestones or developmental delays, and will be given by Dr. Andrea Goldsmith. She's one of our parents at the JCC, and I'm thrilled to have her on in 2 weeks. So I hope to see you guys then. And thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for your fabulous questions. I love questions. You can ask my clients. I love questions and my students.
Thank you, Jennifer. This was amazing.
Good, good. I really like the questions. Thank you.